dawn has not yet broken over the frozen ridge of the Berkshire Downs. The 8th day of January in the year 871 hovers in that liminal space between darkness and light, between the world of yesterday and the violent birth of tomorrow. Frost clings to every blade of dead grass, to every twisted branch of hawthorn, to the iron rings of mail that hang heavy on the shoulders of men who have not slept. The air itself seems to hold its breath, thick with mist that rolls across the ancient trackway the Saxons call the Ridgeway, a path walked by their ancestors since time beyond memory. Somewhere in that gray veil, invisible but close enough to hear breathing, the Great Heathen Army waits. They occupy the high ground. This is not accident but calculation, the cold arithmetic of Viking conquest that has devoured kingdoms from Dublin to the steppes of Rus. King Bagsecg stands among his warriors, a figure carved from oak and iron, eyes the color of Baltic ice scanning the whiteness below. Beside him, Halfdan Ragnarsson, son of Ragnar, brother to Ivar the Boneless, rests his hand on the pommel of a sword that is drunk deeply in York, in East Anglia, in the ruins of monasteries whose bells will never ring again. 5 earls cluster near: Sidroc the Old, whose beard is white with frost and age; Sidroc the Young, whose hands have not yet forgotten the warmth of his homeland; Osbern, Freyna, Harold, names that will be remembered only because of what happens next. The Vikings are not nervous. They have no reason to be. For 6 unbroken years, since that distant summer of 865, when their dragon-prowed ships beached on the coast of East Anglia, they have been victorious. Northumbria fell to their axes. King Ella died screaming in the Blood Eagle, revenge for Ragnar's death, justice carved into flesh. East Anglia's King Edmund became a Christian martyr when he refused to bend the knee. His body pierced by so many arrows he resembled a hedgehog. Mercia paid tribute rather than face annihilation. And now Wessex, the last kingdom, teeters on the edge of extinction. Just 4 days ago, these same Vikings shattered a Saxon army at Reading, sent the brothers Æthelred and Alfred fleeing across winter fields with survivors streaming behind them like autumn leaves before a gale. But the Saxons have regrouped. They have done the impossible. They have come back. King Æthelred, ruler of Wessex since 865, kneels somewhere below in a rough church at Aston Upthorpe, his lips moving in prayer, begging God for a miracle. His younger brother Alfred, barely 22 winters old, untested, hungry, does not kneel. He has divided their forces, taken half the army under his own command, positioned them on the left wing facing the Viking earls' division. Protocol demands he wait for his king. Duty demands patience. But the high ground will not wait, and Alfred can see through the thinning mist that the Vikings are stirring, preparing to descend like wolves on scattered sheep. Somewhere on that frozen ridge, a single hawthorn tree stands alone against the gray sky. The Saxons call it Nachededorne, the naked thorn, and it will become the axis around which this day revolves, the fixed point in a maelstrom of steel and blood. History will remember many battles, but few battles will matter more than what happens here, in this cold hour before sunrise, when 2 civilizations meet and one must break. The frost begins to melt. The mist begins to lift. And somewhere in the distance, a ram's horn sounds its harsh metallic note across the winter air. The age of waiting has ended. To understand the moment, one must first comprehend the world that birthed it, a world fracturing under the weight of its own chaos, a world where Christian kingdoms faced extinction at the hands of pagan warriors who came not to raid, but to conquer, to settle, to erase. The Great Heathen Army that occupies the high ground this frozen morning is not a raiding party grown ambitious. It is an invasion force, a coalition of Norse and Danish chieftains united by greed, ambition, and the seductive mathematics of plunder. Since 865, when their ships first scraped against East Anglian beaches, they have operated with a terrifying clarity of purpose that the fractured Anglo-Saxon kingdoms could not match. England in 871 is not yet England. It is the Heptarchy, 7 kingdoms bound by common language and Christian faith but divided by rivalry, suspicion, and the fatal inability to see beyond their own borders. Northumbria, ancient and proud, fell in 866 when the Vikings captured York, the jewel of the north, and installed puppet kings who ruled at Danish pleasure. East Anglia, wealthy from trade and agriculture, collapsed in 869 when King Edmund chose martyrdom over submission. his death sanctifying his kingdom's destruction. Mercia, the great central realm, has been bled white by tribute payments and political paralysis, its king Burgred already contemplating the exile that awaits him. Only Wessex remains free. Wessex, smallest of the major kingdoms, poorest in treasure, but rich in something the others lacked: leadership. King Æthelred ascended to Wessex's throne in 865, the same year the Great Heathen Army arrived. His reign has been defined by defensive warfare, by the exhausting work of rallying local levies called the Fyrd, by the knowledge that every harvest might be the last, every winter might bring the final assault. His brother Alfred, second born, and thus not raised for kingship, has become his right hand, his battle commander, his hope. Together, they have held the line, but barely. The winter of 870 descended with particular cruelty. On December 28th, Viking longships ascended the Thames to Reading, where Bagsecg and Halfdan established a fortified camp protected by rivers on 3 sides and earthen ramparts on the 4th. From this base, Viking raiders poured into the countryside, burning villages, seizing livestock, terrorizing the population with calculated savagery designed not merely to plunder, but to break the will to resist. The Saxons struck back. On the last day of December, Ealdorman Æthelwulf of Berkshire, a local lord commanding regional militia, ambushed a Viking foraging party at Englefield and destroyed it, a rare victory that sent a jolt of hope through Wessex. But hope is a fragile commodity in a kingdom under siege. 4 days later, on January 4th, King Æthelred and Alfred led the main Saxon army against Reading itself, attempting to storm the Viking fortifications. The assault collapsed in blood and confusion. The Vikings burst from their gates in a coordinated counterattack, their shield walls grinding forward with the mechanical precision of men who have done this 100 times before. Æthelwulf died in the fighting, his body spirited away to Derby for secret burial. The Saxon army fled eastward across the River Loddon, only their superior knowledge of the terrain saving them from complete annihilation. But the Saxons did not break. 4 days later, they are here, on the Berkshire Downs, offering battle again. This resilience, this refusal to surrender, to accept the seemingly inevitable, is what makes Wessex different. The Vikings have conquered greater kingdoms, wealthier kingdoms, kingdoms with larger armies and stronger fortifications, but they have never faced a people quite this stubborn, this determined to remain free or die trying. Bagsecg and Halfdan, confident from 6 years of triumph, do not yet understand what they face. They will learn. King Æthelred of Wessex kneels in the dim interior of a Saxon church at Aston Upthorpe, his lips moving in the ancient rhythms of Latin prayer. He is 30 years old, though the cares of kingship in wartime have aged him beyond his years. A pious man, some would say excessively so, Æthelred believes in the old traditions, that a Christian king must seek God's blessing before battle, that divine favor matters more than tactical advantage, that the outcome of wars is decided not by the strength of men's arms but by the judgment of heaven. His ealdormen wait outside, restless, knowing the sun is rising, knowing the Vikings are visible now on their hilltop positions, knowing every moment of delay surrenders initiative. But Æthelred will not be rushed. Mass must be completed, prayers must be said, God must be consulted before kings commit men to die. His brother Alfred does not share this particular piety. Or perhaps he simply understands that God helps those who help themselves. At 22, Alfred is young enough to believe he might survive this war, and old enough to have witnessed its horrors up close. He has fought at Reading, where Saxon discipline broke against Viking ferocity. He has seen the burnt villages, the scattered refugees, the casual cruelty with which the Northmen treat those they conquer. More crucially, he has studied them. He knows their tactics, their preference for mounted mobility followed by dismounted shield walls, their ability to fortify positions with shocking speed, their talent for psychological warfare. He knows that they are not invincible, merely very, very good at what they do. And he knows with the cold certainty that comes from standing on winter hills watching mist lift from enemy positions, that if he waits for his brother to finish praying, the tactical advantage will evaporate like morning frost. Opposing him across that frozen expanse stands King Bagsecg, a figure about whom history knows almost nothing except the manner of his death. He arrived in England perhaps a year earlier, leading what the Saxon chronicles call the Great Summer Army, reinforcements from Scandinavia that swelled the Great Heathen Army's ranks at the perfect moment, just when years of campaigning threatened to thin their numbers dangerously. The title, king, may be honorary, a war leader elevated by his men rather than inheriting a throne, but it carries weight nonetheless. Bagsecg commands respect, commands warriors, commands the confidence that comes from an unbroken chain of victories. He has planned carefully for this morning. The high ground is his. The fog has lifted just enough to reveal Saxon forces below, but not enough to eliminate all advantage. His army is divided into two wings. He and Halfdan command one division. 5 experienced earls command the other. It is a sensible arrangement, distributing leadership to prevent decapitation strikes, allowing tactical flexibility. Halfdan Ragnarsson, standing beside Bagsecg, embodies Viking legend made flesh. If the sagas are to be believed, and they are not always reliable, he is the son of Ragnar Lodbrok, brother to Ivar the Boneless, scion of a dynasty that has terrorized Europe from Ireland to the Black Sea. Whether the legend is true matters less than the fact that warriors believe it, that Halfdan carries the weight of Norse mythology with him into battle, that men follow him not merely for plunder but because he represents something larger, something almost mystical. He has conquered York, subdued Northumbria, extracted tribute from kingdoms that thought themselves secure behind Roman walls. Wessex is the last obstacle. After Wessex falls, all of England will belong to his people. And yet, watching the Saxon forces regroup below, Halfdan experiences something unfamiliar: uncertainty. These West Saxons should have broken at Reading. They should have sued for peace, paid tribute, accepted the inevitable. Instead, they are here, offering battle again, demonstrating a resilience that troubles him. Perhaps it is nothing. Perhaps it is everything. The Ridgeway in winter is a corridor between worlds. For 3,000 years since the age of stone and bronze, this ancient track has carried travelers, traders, warriors, and pilgrims across the spine of southern Britain. It runs along the crest of the Chalk Downs, high above the river valleys, following terrain that never floods, never becomes impassable, connecting settlements that existed before Rome, before Christ, before written history. The Vikings chose their position with the care of men who understand ground instinctively. They occupy a hill that commands the Ridgeway, forcing any Saxon advance to attack upward, to exhaust themselves climbing while Viking spears wait at the summit. It is the fundamental advantage, the difference that decides battles, when skill and courage are roughly equal. The landscape itself seems designed for slaughter. The downs roll in long, sweeping curves, broken by dry valleys and sudden rises. Sparse vegetation clings to thin soil over chalk bedrock, hawthorn trees twisted by wind, patches of gorse, winter grass brown and dead. There is no cover, no forest to hide flanking movements, no broken ground to disrupt formations. This is open warfare, shield wall against shield wall, the kind of fighting both armies know well. The single hawthorn tree that marks the Viking center stands like a skeletal sentinel, its bare branches scratching at the gray sky. The Saxons call it Nachededorne, and it will become the anchor point of Viking resistance, the place where their line must hold or break. Bagsecg and Halfdan have positioned their forces with professional competence. The army is divided roughly in half, creating 2 independent battle groups that can support each other without creating a single point of failure. The King's division, Bagsecg and Halfdan's personal retainers, the veteran warriors who have survived 6 years of continuous campaigning, holds the right. The Earls division, led by Sidroc the Old, Sidroc the Young, Osbern, Freyna, and Harold, anchors the left near the thorn tree. Between them, perhaps 3,000 warriors prepare for battle with the calm efficiency of craftsmen approaching familiar work. Mail is checked for broken links. Weapons are tested for balance. Shields, round and painted with clan symbols or personal designs, are slung over shoulders. Some men pray to Thor or Odin. Others simply sharpen blades that are already sharp, finding comfort in ritual. The Saxons, assembling in the valley below, face not merely a tactical challenge but an existential one. King Æthelred's division is still at Aston Upthorpe, delayed by the king's insistence on completing mass before committing to battle. This leaves Alfred commanding the left wing, perhaps 1,500 men drawn from Wessex and Berkshire. local fyrd levies stiffened by the king's household warriors. They are not professional soldiers in the Viking sense. They are farmers and craftsmen called to defend their homes, given spears and shields and rudimentary training, motivated by desperation more than martial skill. But desperation, Alfred has learned, can be a powerful weapon if properly directed. He can see the Viking positions now, dark figures silhouetted against pearl-gray sky. He can see the confident way they stand, the casual arrangement of warriors who do not fear what ascends toward them. He can see the thorn tree marking their center, and he makes his decision, the decision that will define this day and perhaps his entire life. He will not wait for Æthelred. He will not surrender the morning to Viking advantage. He will attack now immediately, driving his division uphill before the enemy fully expects it, before the sun climbs high enough to eliminate all shadow, before confidence hardens into certainty. Orders ripple through Saxon ranks. Shields come up, spears lower. The fyrd begins its advance and the frozen grass crunches beneath 10,000 feet. The collision comes not with a crash but with a roar, the sound of human voices raised in fury, fear, defiance, the primal scream that precedes death. Alfred's wing strikes the Viking earls' division first, Saxon shields slamming into Norse shields with the sound of thunder rolling across empty hills. The impact staggers both lines. Men in the front rank brace against the weight of those behind, feet sliding on frost-slicked grass, shoulders pressed against shield rims, the crush of bodies so tight that warriors cannot fall even when spears puncture mail, when swords find gaps between iron plates, when axes split bone. This is not the romanticized combat of legend. This is butchery, close and personal and utterly without mercy. The Vikings expected this. They have fought shield wall battles across England, Scotland, Ireland, Francia. Their line holds with the confidence of professional warriors who trust the men beside them absolutely. Sidrock the Old anchors the center near the thorn tree, his white beard flecked with spray from nearby violence, his voice cutting through chaos with commands that reorganize the line as it bends but does not break. His son, Sidrock the Young, fights 3 paces away, killing with the methodical efficiency of a butcher at work. Spears thrust forward in rhythm, 1, 2, 3, finding Saxon flesh, withdrawing, thrusting again. The front rank of Alfred's attack staggers, falters, threatens to disintegrate under pressure that would break lesser men. But Alfred has not climbed this hill to retreat. He is somewhere in the press of bodies, identifiable only by the dragon banner of Wessex that struggles above the melee, his voice hoarse from shouting orders that no one can hear over the din. Around him, the feared fights with the desperation of men defending homes, families, everything they have ever known. A Saxon thane drives his spear through Osbjörn's throat, and the earl goes down gurgling, his lifeblood turning frost to crimson mud. Another Viking warrior, too slow to raise his shield, takes an axe to the skull and collapses like a marionette with cut strings. The thorn tree, that skeletal witness, shakes as men use it for leverage, as bodies pile against its trunk, as blood soaks into roots that have stood for a century and will stand for centuries more. And then Æthelred arrives. The king's division, finally released from prayer, crashes into the Viking king's position on the right flank with the force of divine judgment made manifest. Bagsecg and Halfdan, who have been watching the fighting around the thorn tree with professional assessment, suddenly have their own crisis. The Saxon line here is fresh, disciplined, led by a king who believes God fights beside him. The Viking response is immediate and savage. Halfdan leads a counterattack that drives 30 feet into Saxon ranks before momentum dies. Men die in windrows, their bodies trampled by those still standing, the ground becoming treacherous with viscera and dropped weapons. The battle rages around the thorn tree from morning until the sun begins its descent toward winter twilight. There is no clear moment of decision, no single heroic act that turns the tide. Instead, there is gradual erosion, the slow realization among Viking warriors that the Saxons will not break, that every foot of ground must be purchased in blood, that this is different from previous battles where enemies fled after the first determined push. Sidrock the Young falls, his skull crushed by a Saxon warhammer. Freyna takes a spear through the ribs and dies wheezing. Harold, attempting to rally his men, is cut down by multiple blows, his body disappearing beneath the surge of combat. And somewhere in the chaos, King Bagsecg, leading from the front as Viking kings must, takes a Saxon blade through the gap between helmet and mail collar, and the life leaves his eyes before he hits frozen earth. Bagsecg's death changes everything. Not immediately. Battles do not pivot on single moments the way storytellers claim, but gradually, like a ship taking on water, like a building settling before collapse. The king's division of the Viking army, already pressed hard by Æthelred's assault, loses cohesion as word spreads that Bagsecg has fallen. Warriors who fought with the certainty of victory now fight with the doubt of survivors. Halfdan Ragnarsson, suddenly commanding alone, attempts to restore order, his voice cutting through pandemonium with commands that might have worked an hour ago, but are now too late, issued into chaos that has passed the point of control. Around the thorn tree, the pressure intensifies. Alfred senses it before he sees it, that subtle shift in resistance, the way Viking shields no longer press forward with quite the same confidence, the way gaps appear in their line and take longer to close. He drives his division harder, accepting casualties he cannot afford because he understands this is the moment, the inflection point where battles are won or lost, where armies break or hold. A Saxon warrior, history does not record his name, kills Sidroc the Old, the veteran earl who has anchored the Viking center all day. The old man dies well, taking 2 Saxons with him, but his death is catastrophic. The line around the thorn tree wavers, bends backward, begins to fracture. The Vikings are not cowards. Even in retreat, they maintain something resembling order, falling back in stages, covering each withdrawal with ferocious resistance. But psychological momentum has shifted irrevocably. These are men who have conquered kingdoms, who have made kings kneel and bishops beg, who have believed themselves invincible for so long that defeat has become inconceivable. And yet they are defeated. They can feel it in their bones, in the way Saxon pressure no longer eases, in the bodies of fallen comrades who were alive this morning and will never see another dawn. 5 earls are dead. The king is dead. The high ground, that precious advantage purchased with such care, is slipping away. Halfdan makes the decision all good commanders must eventually make. He orders retreat. Not rout, not panicked flight, but organized withdrawal toward Reading, toward the fortified camp where defensive positions can be re-established, where exhausted warriors can regroup behind earthen ramparts and river barriers. It is the correct decision, the only decision, but it tastes like ash in his mouth. For 6 years, the Great Heathen Army has been victorious. They have taken what they wanted, gone where they pleased, made the very name Viking synonymous with invincibility. And now, on this frozen hill in Wessex, they are running. The Saxons pursue, but not far. They are exhausted, bleeding, traumatized by violence that has pushed human endurance to its limits. Alfred does not order a long pursuit. He understands that his army, victorious though it is, teeters on the edge of collapse. Men sink to the ground where they stand, too tired to celebrate, too numb to process what they have accomplished. The dead lie everywhere, Viking and Saxon intermixed in that democracy of death that transcends nationality, religion, politics. The thorn tree, that skeletal witness, stands above a carpet of corpses, its branches unchanged, its roots fed on blood that will fertilize new growth come spring. Æthelred finds Alfred as the sun touches the western horizon. The brothers stand together without speaking, 2 silhouettes against fading light, watching Viking survivors disappear toward Reading. They have won, but both know this is not the end. The Great Heathen Army is wounded, not destroyed. Bagsecg is dead, but Halfdan lives. And even as they stand here, more Vikings are sailing from Scandinavia, drawn by tales of English wealth, English weakness, English land waiting to be taken. This victory is real, but it is also temporary, a single bright moment in a war that has years yet to run. The night after Ashdown, Saxon warriors bury their dead in shallow graves scraped from frozen earth, while Viking corpses, including Bagsecg and the 5 earls, are stripped of valuables and left for scavengers. It is not cruelty, but pragmatism. The living have neither time nor energy for elaborate funerals. Local folklore will later claim that Bagsecg was interred at Wayland's Smithy, that ancient Neolithic tomb on the Ridgeway, but this is almost certainly myth-making, the way oral tradition transforms historical events into legend. What matters is that the king who led the Great Summer Army from Scandinavia to conquer England died on a muddy hilltop in Berkshire, killed by men he had underestimated. The immediate consequences are both encouraging and sobering. Wessex celebrates its first major victory in 6 years, the first time since 865 that Saxon forces have decisively defeated the Great Heathen Army in open battle. Morale soars. Refugees begin trickling back to abandoned villages. The Fyrd, that militia of farmers and craftsmen, discovers it can face professional Viking warriors and survive. But the strategic situation remains desperate. 2 weeks after Ashdown, Halfdan leads the Vikings to victory at Bagsecg. 2 months later, they win again at Merton. The year 871 sees 9 major battles in Wessex alone, a grinding campaign of attrition that bleeds both sides white. King Æthelred, weakened by wounds sustained in the year's fighting, dies after Easter, probably on April 23rd, though historical records are unclear. Alfred, that young prince who attacked without waiting for his brother's prayers to finish, ascends to a throne surrounded by enemies. What follows is an education in resilience. King Alfred, history will call him Alfred the Great, the only English monarch to receive that title, spends the next 7 years learning how to fight Vikings not through pitched battles but through strategy, fortification, and ruthless pragmatism. He pays them to leave, then uses the breathing room to reorganize Wessex's defenses. He builds a network of fortified towns called burhs, creating strong points that the Vikings cannot easily bypass. He reforms the Fyrd, establishing a rotation system that keeps some warriors always in the field while others tend farms. He builds England's first navy, understanding that an island kingdom must control the seas if it wishes to survive. The Vikings, for their part, learn a harder lesson. The Great Heathen Army splits in 873, with Halfdan leading forces north to consolidate control over Northumbria, while other commanders focus on Mercia. The unified force that once seemed capable of conquering all of England fragments into competing warbands. In 878, Alfred wins his decisive victory at Edington, forcing Viking leader Guthrum to accept baptism and withdraw to East Anglia. England remains divided, the Danelaw in the north and east, Wessex in the south and west. But the dream of total Viking conquest dies. And yet Ashdown's true significance lies not in these immediate tactical or strategic outcomes, but in what it represents. The moment a people discovered they could resist, that defeat was not inevitable, that courage and desperation could overcome superior force. The farmers and craftsmen who climbed that frozen hill on January 8, 871, were not professional soldiers. They were ordinary men pushed to extraordinary extremes. Defending a way of life they refused to surrender. Their victory was incomplete, temporary, purchased at horrific cost, but it was real, and it mattered. Centuries later, archaeologists will search for the battlefield and find nothing conclusive. The ridgeway still exists, ancient and unchanging. Somewhere near it, perhaps at Lowberry Hill, perhaps at King's Standing Hill, men fought and died around a solitary hawthorn tree. The tree is long gone. The warriors are dust, but the consequences ripple forward through time. An England that remained English, a language that survived, a culture that adapted rather than vanished. And on that field, beneath the smoke and the broken steel, beneath the blood-soaked grass and the gray winter sky, the destiny of an age was rewritten.